Good morning. My name is Peter Bella, and I'm delighted to have been asked to talk about the climate emergency, where we are now and where we're likely headed. Before we dig in, I'd like to take the time to center us on the beauty of our home. This photo, known as the Blue Marble, was taken from Apollo 17 as the crew was traveling toward the moon December 7, 1972. Climate change threatens our planet. The science behind climate change is based on the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect was defined in 1859, and our scientific understanding of the effect has become richer ever since. So, the energy comes to the Earth from the sun. It's absorbed and warms the Earth. Some of it is re-radiated back out into space in the form of infrared radiation, and some of the outgoing infrared is trapped by the natural greenhouse gas layer, which is great because it keeps the temperatures within comfortable boundaries for all life here on Earth, including ours. The problem is, as we add to the blanket, as we add artificial human greenhouse gas emissions to the natural greenhouse gas layer, more of the outgoing heat is trapped, and the temperature is going up. This Apollo mission photo shows the thin atmosphere on Earth, about 10 miles deep from the Earth's surface up to the top of the troposphere, and we're filling it with excess greenhouse gases. We continue to spew 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the thin shell of atmosphere that surrounds our planet every single day, as if it's an open sewer. The accumulated amount of greenhouse gas pollution traps as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 first-generation atomic bombs going off every 24 hours all around the world. Greenhouse gases come from human activities, the burning of fossil fuels in transportation and energy production, mining, agriculture, particularly animal agriculture, the burning and clearing of forests, the thawing of the permafrost, and other sources. Now I'd like to switch gears to talk about some of the ramifications of climate change. As the impacts and the physical extent of climate change events increase, you'll begin to see a pattern of interconnections between them. So we're about to talk about changes within global systems once an element within an interconnected system reaches a tipping point. Global-scale climate challenges arise when interconnected climate systems reach a tipping point where human beings live. This graphic contains the elements you'll see in an upcoming clip. First, let's look at the legend in the lower left-hand corner of the graphic. At the top of the legend, you'll notice the icons for regional elements and for global elements. Tipping points in global systems cascade due to the interconnectivity of global elements at risk. Those global elements are shown in the solid circles, color-coded as you see in the legend, by the likelihood of reaching a tipping point as global average temperatures increase due to climate change. As we approach an average global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, those global elements shown with a solid red circle background become most likely. Let's look briefly at the red-colored global elements listed as the Greenland ice sheet, Labrador-Erminger Seas convection, and the West Antarctic ice sheet. In the Earth's polar region, ocean water forms sea ice. Ice locked up in glaciers and the polar ice caps is fresh water. As ice forms from freezing seawater, the salt is left behind in the surrounding ocean. As the cold seawater gets saltier, its density increases and it starts to sink. Surface water is pulled in to replace the sinking water, which in turn eventually becomes cold and salty enough to sink. This initiates the deep ocean currents driving the global ocean conveyor belt. Eventually, the water gets pulled back up towards the surface and warms up in a process called upwelling, completing the cycle. In the Atlantic, off the Florida coast, you can see the Gulf Stream, part of this circulatory system, carrying warmer surface water to the British Isles, keeping their winter temperatures moderate. But if the planet continues to warm, fresh water from melting ice at the poles would slow or even stop this circulation, due in part to reductions in the concentration of salt in the ocean near the freezing seawater, which would in turn slow the sinking of the cold, salty seawater, as well as due to a slowing of ocean ice formation. In December 2021, scientists reported that the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica will likely collapse in the next 5 to 10 years. The Thwaites Glacier is comparable in size to Great Britain or Florida. The nickname Antarctica's Doomsday Glacier is given to Thwaites because if the ice shelf collapses, then the enormous volumes of ice held back by Thwaites are free to funnel into the glacier bed, no longer restrained from accelerating into the ocean by Thwaites. The scientists said if Thwaites itself were to melt, then global sea levels would rise about 2 feet. If the Thwaites Glacier and other critical neighboring glaciers cannot hold back the West Antarctic ice sheet, global sea level could rise about 10.8 feet, affecting coastlines around the world. With that in mind, I'd like to present a brief excerpt from a presentation given during the February 18th, 2023 World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
These are the 16 tipping elements, the large biophysical systems that we have scientific evidence that it regulates the state of the entire climate system on Earth. 9 of these 16 are showing signs of instability. Push them too far, and they will shift over from supporting humanity to starting to undermine humanity. 2 of them, the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet, together represent 10 meters sea level rise. This shows scientifically that 1.5 degrees Celsius is a physical limit. It is not a political target. Here's the one that is most researched. Greenland ice sheet, accelerated melting, warming 4 times faster than the planet as a whole, releasing cold fresh water, slowing down the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, pushing the whole monsoon system down further south, causing droughts and forest fires over the Amazon rainforest. 1 more tipping element system, locking warm surface water in the Southern Ocean, accelerating the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. The North Pole is connected to the South Pole in regulating the stability of the entire Earth system. Dear friends, scientifically, this is not a climate crisis. We are now facing something deeper. Mass extinction, air pollution, undermining ecosystem functions, really putting humanity's future at risk. This is a planetary crisis.
You now know why we think of it as a global climate crisis. It is. You may have heard that the poorer countries on the planet are both least responsible for the climate crisis and are going to suffer the most from the climate crisis. The headline here reads, "Endless record heat in Asia as highest April temperatures recorded." For the moment, turning aside from the concept of what a rise in sea level of 10 feet or 10 meters would mean for coastal communities around the world, let's focus briefly on a problem killing people now: heat. Many areas of the world are uninhabitable because of high temperatures. This uninhabitable zone is increasing. If we continue with our greenhouse gas emissions, then by 2070, as many as 3 billion people will live in uninhabitable zones due to extreme temperatures. Of course, climate disasters do not seek out the impoverished. As I switch slides, please keep your eye on the intense red zones indicating areas which will become uninhabitable in the future. When we look at the global distribution of poverty, we are looking at people without the resources to adapt to disasters. That lack of resources is shared across the poorer countries. Multidimensional poverty is defined as being deprived in a range of health, education, and living standards indicators. The intensity is the share of indicators in which the multidimensionally poor are deprived on average. So climate impact forecasts show those least able to recover from climate impacts are due to suffer temperature extremes which will make their homes unlivable. But the risk is hardly limited to temperatures higher than the body can tolerate, or to the drought that heat waves can bring. This is Kiribati, about 1,200 miles south of Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Consider what this photograph would look like after 10 meters of sea level rise. By late August 2022, 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater from floods. The blue to black colors in the image illustrate where the land is underwater. Researchers have stated that climate change likely increased extreme monsoon rainfall, flooding highly vulnerable communities in Pakistan. While climate science invariably focuses on the future, climate justice brings the past with it. This fact may be lost to audiences considering the global scale of climate impacts, as world history is not well known by many, especially seen through the lens of climate justice. The legacy of world conquest in history continues in the sense of extraction of resources and people to the powerful countries, leaving the colonies weaker, not stronger. Weaker means more vulnerable to climate impacts. Back in the United States, our own history and current struggles deeply inform the climate justice challenges in this country. Income inequality in the U.S. was found to have increased by about 20% from 1980 to 2016, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Data updated to 2023 finds income inequality means that, while every American faces the potential for increasing risks of impacts due to climate change, with sharp income inequality and rising costs due to inflation, rebuilding a home may be out of reach for some who own a home destroyed in a climate event. Rebuilding a life after a climate disaster may be out of reach for those on the lowest income levels. Here's a snapshot of weather and climate disasters in the U.S. According to NOAA, since 1980, the U.S. has sustained at least 341 weather and climate disasters, where overall damages reached or exceeded $1 billion. The total cost of these 341 events exceeds $2.4 trillion. This graphic indicates $18 billion events just last year. If global temperature averages continue to rise as science predicts, the severity of weather events and their cost will as well. As the IPCC said just weeks ago, the choices that we make in this decade will have impacts now and for thousands of years. For a long time now, we haven't been paying attention to this climate crisis. Let's take on a sense of urgency. Let's get on with this. Now we have the tools with which we can really start acting effectively. The Inflation Reduction Act allocates $369 billion to climate solutions and energy security. It's likely to be far larger than that in the total amount of money, and one of the factors that determines how much money will go into climate solutions as a result of this law is how quickly all of us, the thousands of citizens from all 50 states and Puerto Rico and Guam, stimulate the cities and counties and states and businesses and individuals and others to take advantage of this act. The IRA overall will result in $4.1 trillion in new cumulative capital investment over the next decade. Solar and wind will see nearly a doubling of the current projected spending through 2030 to $334 billion. Carbon capture, transportation and storage, $28 billion per year. Clean hydrogen, and there's a difference between hydrogen made from fossil fuels and hydrogen made with renewable energy by splitting the water molecules, increases by 3 times to $4 billion annually, mostly clean hydrogen, and increases steadily up to $60 billion by 2035. The consumer technologies such as induction stoves, electric vehicles, all kinds of efficiency improvements that save money and also clean up the environment. In addition to the IRA, we have the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the BIL, which allocates about $1.2 trillion to over $91 billion for public transit, $75 billion for clean energy, including some of the transmission and efficiency work that needs to be done. Also, carbon capture and direct air capture. Don't get me started on that. I hope they have some kind of breakthrough. I think it's a little bit preposterous right now, but others disagree. So, $66 billion for passenger and freight rail, and we've recently seen how we need safety upgrades and efficiency upgrades. East Palestine, Ohio, has really been hit hard, as have quite a number of other communities. We need to improve passenger and freight rail for sure. $50 billion for climate resilience. Also, $21.6 billion for remediation, environmental remediation, and $18 billion for electric vehicles. Some of this funding was previously authorized but not designated for where it was going. If you take a look at how much money has been spent and allocated through tax expenditures for climate solutions, for a long time, the overall spending was fairly low, particularly compared to what it should have been. But now look at the difference under these laws. This includes the CHIPS Act, which has some provisions that are relevant to climate as well, but I'll focus mainly on the IRA and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The historic perspective is sobering. If you look at the emissions, they've been going down for a variety of reasons. We have made a little bit of progress. But if you look at what would continue in the way of reductions under current policy, it's not nearly enough. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, we get much closer to the target for 2030 in the Paris Agreement. So we need to do more, but we need to start by fully implementing these historic laws and programs they just made available to us. I mentioned earlier that we anticipate greater investments than the original projections, and here's a sample. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the estimates for the IRA's climate and energy tax credits jumped from original projections of $391 billion between 2022 and 2031 to about $570 billion for the same period. Since Mr. Biden signed the law, companies have announced plans to invest at least $150 billion in clean energy projects, including at least 46 new or expanded large-scale factories, making everything from wind turbine towers to electric vehicle batteries. The next series of slides all come from the San Antonio City Council B session held December 14, 2022. The focus was on a new program for the city targeting resiliency and sustainability initiatives. This overview slide hints at the discussion in which the city is working to incorporate and leverage their funding with incoming Inflation Reduction Act funding. Last October, Councilwoman Anna Sandoval created what is called the REES Fund, an acronym for Resiliency, Energy Efficiency, and Sustainability. The cash derives from CPS energy funds drawn off by the city and averages about $10 million a year. While these are the priority areas given in the original city ordinance, the city is only spending some of it in anticipation of further guidance from the federal government on IRA. You can see here that from the approximately $95 million available in 2023, they've allocated some, but held $7.2 million back pending such clarification. I am working with the Office of Sustainability and a number of other citizen stakeholders to understand not only how best these funds can be managed, but how they can be coordinated with the massive funding available through the federal government now for climate. And so we return to the cradle. I hope I leave you with a feeling of immediacy in addressing the climate crisis and with a deeper understanding of what climate justice is, but more importantly, why it is. Hang on, Mom, we're coming. Thank you for your time and attention.